A cluster of mud and thatch huts clings to a malarial hilltop above a swamp, and from this improbable beginning, rises the single most powerful political entity the ancient world will ever know. Rome, a city that begins as a cattle market at a river crossing and ends as the governing force over 60 million souls stretched across 3 continents. How does a village become an empire? How does a republic devour itself? And why, 15 centuries after its fall, do modern nations still build their courthouses with Roman columns and name their legislatures after Roman institutions? This is the complete story, not a fragment, not a summary. The full arc of Roman civilization from its deepest roots in the Bronze Age marshlands of Latium, through the Age of Kings and Etruscan influence, into the fierce republic that conquered Italy and then the Mediterranean, through the civil wars that destroyed it from within, into the imperial age of marble forums and legionary frontiers stretching from Scotland to Mesopotamia. The daily lives of senators and slaves, merchants and gladiators, the crises that shattered the 3rd century, the emperor who embraced the cross, the division of East and West, the fall of Rome in 476, and the 1,000-year Byzantine continuation that followed, all the way to the legacy that still shapes law, language, architecture, and political thought in our world today. More than 800 million people speak languages born from Latin. The legal codes governing Europe descend from a compilation ordered by Justinian in the 6th century. The very word republic is Roman. This is not distant history. This is the foundation beneath the modern world, still bearing weight. If you find yourself drawn to complete journeys through the rise and fall of civilizations, consider subscribing. Each week we follow the full lifespan of a world that shaped history. Let us begin where Rome begins. Not with glory, but with mud and hills and the slow patience of centuries. The Tiber runs brown and heavy through a landscape of low volcanic hills. Ash from eruptions thousands of years past has settled into the soil, producing a stone called tufa, soft enough to cut with bronze tools, hard enough to last centuries. The river bends westward here, slowing where a marshy valley opens between 7 distinct rises of ground. An island splits the current at one narrow point, creating the only natural ford for miles in either direction. This crossing matters. It is where the salt road from the coastal flats meets the inland routes that shepherd communities have walked since the 2nd millennium before the Common Era. Around 1,000 years before the Common Era, the hilltops above this ford hold clusters of oval huts. Post holes cut into the Palatine's bedrock reveal their dimensions. Small dwellings perhaps 4 meters across, with wattle and daub walls and thatched roofs supported by a central timber post. The people who build them belong to the Latial culture, closely related to the Villanovan peoples who occupy much of central Italy during this early Iron Age. They cremate their dead and place the ashes in miniature urns shaped like the very huts they inhabit, ceramic vessels with tiny carved doors and peaked roofs, buried in the soft tufa alongside bronze fibulae and small clay vessels for offerings. These are not isolated communities. The salt route beneath them connects the Tyrrhenian coast to the Apennine interior, and salt is among the most valuable commodities of the ancient world, essential for preserving meat, tanning hides, and sustaining livestock through winter. The Latin word for salt, sal, will eventually give its name to the Via Salaria, one of Rome's oldest roads. The communities perched above this trade artery grow not through conquest, but through position. They control passage. By the 9th century before the Common Era, the hilltop settlements show increasing signs of contact with the wider Mediterranean world. Greek traders have established colonies along southern Italy's coast, at Cumae, at Pithecusae on the island of Ischia, bringing painted pottery, the alphabet adapted from Phoenician script, and new metallurgical techniques. To the north, the Etruscan civilization is crystallizing in the cities of Veii, Cerveteri, and Tarquinia, developing sophisticated urban planning, hydraulic engineering, and a vibrant artistic tradition visible in their painted tomb chambers where dancers, musicians, and banqueters move across plastered walls in terracotta red and deep blue. The Latin settlements sit precisely between these two cultural spheres. Etruscan Veii lies barely 15 kilometers to the northwest. Greek influence filters up through Campanian trade networks. The communities on the Seven Hills absorb techniques from both directions: Etruscan methods of drainage and construction, Greek models of religious architecture, and ceramic production. Pottery fragments from the Palatine and Esquiline settlements show this cultural mixing accelerating through the 8th century before the Common Era. The traditional founding date, 753 years before the Common Era, corresponds roughly to the archaeological moment when these separate hilltop villages begin functioning as a single community. The marshy valley between the Palatine and Capitoline hills, previously used as a burial ground, ceases to receive graves. Something is changing in how the inhabitants conceive of this low ground. It is no longer the space of the dead. It is becoming shared civic space, the first forum. The transition from scattered pastoral hamlets to a unified settlement with a common center represents not a single dramatic act, but a generation of gradual coalescence, driven by trade, proximity, and the strategic value of controlling the river crossing where shepherds, salt merchants, and travelers have met for centuries. The Forum Valley, no longer a burial ground but a civic center paved with packed earth, stands at the heart of a community that has outgrown its kings. By the late 6th century before the Common Era, the monarchy that guided Rome through its earliest urbanization has become intolerable. The revolution of 509 before the Common Era, whether it unfolds as a single dramatic expulsion or a more gradual transfer of authority, replaces the rule of one man with a system of shared power. 2 consuls, elected annually, hold supreme military and civil command. Their power is absolute but temporary, and each can veto the other. This principle of collegiality, of divided and time-limited authority, becomes the Republic's defining innovation. Yet the new Republic is not a democracy. Power concentrates in the hands of patrician families, perhaps 50 clans who claim descent from the original senators appointed under the kings. They alone hold priesthoods, magistracies, and knowledge of sacred law. The majority of Rome's population, the plebeians, possess citizenship but lack access to political office, legal protection against arbitrary magisterial power, and even written law they can consult. The tension between these orders defines Roman politics for the next 2 centuries. In 494 before the Common Era, the plebeians take radical action. Facing debt bondage and military conscription without political representation, they withdraw from the city entirely, gathering on the sacred mount beyond the Anio River. This first secession forces the patricians to concede the creation of tribunes of the plebs. magistrates whose persons are sacrosanct and who possess the power to block any act of state that threatens plebeian interests. The tribunate introduces a revolutionary principle that the state must answer to its poorest armed citizens. Around 450 before the Common Era, plebeian pressure produces the 12 Tables, Rome's first written legal code, inscribed on bronze tablets and displayed in the Forum. The laws themselves are harsh, permitting creditors to divide a debtor's body, but their publication strips patricians of their monopoly on legal knowledge. Any citizen can now read the rules that govern contracts, property, inheritance, and assault. The modest temples of this early Forum, built from local tufa stone with terracotta decorations, witness decades of incremental plebeian gains. The Licinian Sextian laws of 367 before the Common Era open the consulship to plebeians. By 287, the Lex Hortensia grants plebiscites the force of law binding on all citizens. The conflict of the orders ends not in revolution, but in the creation of a new mixed aristocracy, patrician and plebeian, united by wealth and office-holding. Externally, Rome fights for survival. In 390 before the Common Era, Gallic warriors under Brennus overwhelm a Roman army at the Allia River and sack the city itself. Only the Capitoline citadel holds. The trauma reshapes Roman military thinking and urban defense. The massive Servian walls, built from Grotta Oscura tufa in the decades following, enclose the entire city for the first time. Recovery leads to expansion. The Latin War of 340 to 338 before the Common Era dissolves the old Latin League and replaces it with a network of bilateral alliances binding each community directly to Rome. Some receive full citizenship, others partial rights, still others allied status with military obligations. This graduated system of incorporation, offering eventual integration rather than permanent subjugation, becomes Rome's most powerful tool of expansion. The three Samnite Wars, stretching from 343 to 290 before the Common Era, pit Rome against the fierce mountain confederacies of central southern Italy. The Manipular Legion emerges during these campaigns, flexible units of 120 men replacing the rigid phalanx, capable of fighting on broken terrain. The Via Appia, begun in 312 by the censor Appius Claudius Caecus, drives south toward Capua, a military highway paved with polygonal basalt blocks that binds conquered territory to the capital. By 280 before the Common Era, Rome's expansion reaches the Greek cities of southern Italy. Tarentum summons King Pyrrhus of Epirus, who defeats Roman armies at Heraclea and Asculum, but at devastating cost. His withdrawal in 275 leaves all peninsular Italy under Roman authority, a federation of allies, colonies, and citizens stretching from the Po Valley to the Strait of Messina, bound by roads, treaties, and the promise of shared prosperity under Roman military protection. The strait between Italy and Sicily measures barely 3 kilometers at its narrowest point. In 264 before the Common Era, this slender channel of water becomes the threshold across which Rome steps from peninsular power into a contest for mastery of the entire western Mediterranean. On the far side waits Carthage, a Phoenician trading empire whose fleets have dominated these waters for 3 centuries, whose merchant vessels carry silver from Spain, tin from Britain, gold from West Africa, and grain from the fertile plains of what Romans call Libya. The collision between these two powers will consume a generation of men and reshape the political geography of the ancient world. Rome possesses no navy. Its legions have conquered Italy through discipline on land, through the grinding advance of infantry in close formation. Carthage commands hundreds of warships, quinqueremes with 5 banks of oars, crewed by experienced Punic and Numidian sailors who have fought naval engagements since their grandfathers' time. Yet Roman adaptability proves decisive. According to tradition, Roman shipwrights copy a captured Carthaginian vessel plank by plank, constructing over 100 warships in 60 days. They add the corvus, a boarding bridge with an iron spike that locks onto enemy decks, transforming naval combat into the close-quarters infantry fighting where legionaries excel. The First Punic War grinds on for 23 years, from 264 to 241 before the Common Era. Battles rage across Sicily, along the North African coast, and in open waters where storms destroy more ships than enemy action. Rome loses fleet after fleet to tempests. Perhaps 100,000 men drowned across the war's duration, yet rebuilds each time with a persistence that astounds the Mediterranean world. The final Roman victory at the Aegates Islands in 241 forces Carthage to surrender Sicily, pay an indemnity of 3,200 talents of silver, and withdraw from waters it once considered its own. Sicily becomes Rome's first overseas province, administered not through the Italian alliance system, but through a governor dispatched from the capital. Within 3 years, Rome seizes Sardinia and Corsica from a Carthage weakened by a mercenary revolt. The humiliation burns. Carthage compensates by expanding into Spain under the Barcid family, Hamilcar, then Hasdrubal, then the young Hannibal, who swears an oath of eternal enmity against Rome. By 218, Hannibal commands a veteran army in Iberia and makes his decision. He marches north with perhaps 50,000 infantry, 9,000 cavalry, and 37 war elephants, crossing the Pyrenees, fording the Rhône, and ascending into the Alpine passes as autumn snow begins to fall. The crossing costs Hannibal nearly half his force. Men and animals slip from icy ledges into gorges hundreds of meters deep. Yet the army that descends into the Po Valley in late autumn remains formidable, hardened, desperate, and led by a tactical genius. At the Trebbio in December of 218, at Lake Trasimene in June of 217, Hannibal destroys Roman armies through ambush and envelopment. Then comes Cannae, on the 2nd of August, 216 before the Common Era. On a flat Apulian plain near the Aufidus River, Hannibal's centre deliberately yields, drawing the massed Roman infantry forward while Carthaginian cavalry sweeps both flanks and closes the trap from behind. Between 50 and 70,000 Roman and Allied soldiers die in a single afternoon, the worst military disaster in the Republic's history. Yet Rome refuses to negotiate. The Senate levies new legions from a population that has already lost a generation of young men. Fabius Maximus adopts a strategy of delay and attrition, denying Hannibal the decisive engagement he needs while Roman forces recapture allied cities that defected after Cannae. The war in Italy becomes a slow strangulation. Meanwhile, the young Publius Cornelius Scipio carries the conflict to Spain, defeating Carthaginian forces and cutting Hannibal's supply lines. In 204, Scipio crosses to Africa itself, threatening Carthage directly. Hannibal is recalled. At Zama in 202, Scipio's legions and Numidian allied cavalry shatter the Carthaginian army. The peace terms strip Carthage of its fleet, its Spanish territories, and its sovereignty in foreign affairs. Rome now dominates the western Mediterranean. Within decades it turns eastward, defeating Macedonia's Philip V in 197, crushing the Seleucid Antiochus III at Magnesia in 190, and dismantling the Macedonian kingdom entirely by 168. In 146, Roman legions simultaneously destroy Carthage and Corinth. The Carthaginian site is razed, its population enslaved. Corinth burns as a warning to Greece. Rome governs provinces stretching from Spain to Asia Minor, extracting tribute, grain, and slaves from conquered peoples across 3 continents. The wealth of 3 continents pours into Rome, and the Republic begins to devour itself. By the mid-2nd century before the Common Era, the Italian countryside has transformed. Vast estates worked by enslaved war captives replace the small holdings that once sustained the citizen soldier class. Senators and equestrians accumulate land in enormous latifundia, growing grain and olives with slave labor imported from Carthage, Greece, Sardinia, and Spain. The free peasantry, the backbone of the legions that conquered the Mediterranean, drifts landless into Rome, swelling the urban population into a volatile mass dependent on irregular grain distributions and seasonal employment. The Forum grows grander with each passing decade. Basilicas rise in travertine and tufa along its northern edge. Triumphal arches commemorate victories in distant provinces. Yet beneath this monumental confidence, the political system strains under pressures its founders never anticipated. The constitution designed for a city-state governing central Italy now administers territories from the Atlantic to the Euphrates, and the contradictions prove fatal. In 133 before the Common Era, Tiberius Sempronius Gracchus, tribune of the plebs, proposes redistributing public land to dispossessed citizens. The Senate, whose members hold much of that land illegally, responds not with debate, but with murder. Senators and their clients beat Tiberius and 300 of his supporters to death with wooden benches and chair legs on the Capitoline Hill, the first political bloodshed in Rome's domestic politics in nearly 4 centuries. A decade later, his brother Gaius Gracchus pursues broader reforms: subsidized grain, colonial foundations, citizenship extension to Italian allies. In 121, the Senate passes its first emergency decree, the Senatus Consultum Ultimum, and Gaius dies in the violence that follows. 3,000 of his supporters are executed without trial. The precedent of political murder, once established, proves impossible to contain. Gaius Marius, a military commander of equestrian origin, reshapes the army itself beginning in 107. He opens legionary recruitment to the landless poor, equipping them at state expense and binding their loyalty to their commander rather than to the Republic. These professional soldiers serve for 16 years and expect land grants upon discharge, land only their general can deliver. The army becomes a personal instrument. Marius's rival Lucius Cornelius Sulla marches his legions on Rome itself in 88 before the Common Era, the first Roman general to turn the Republic's own armies against its capital. After years of civil war and eastern campaigning, Sulla returns in 82, declares himself dictator, and posts proscription lists in the Forum. Names appear on whitened boards, and any citizen may kill the proscribed and claim their property. Perhaps 9,000 die. Sulla reshapes the constitution to entrench senatorial supremacy, then retires in 79 and dies the following year, leaving a republic scarred by the knowledge that one man with loyal legions can seize absolute power. The generation that follows produces three figures who will complete the republic's destruction. Gnaeus Pompeius Magnus conquers the east between 66 and 62, annexing Syria and reorganizing client kingdoms from the Caucasus to Judea. Marcus Licinius Crassus, the wealthiest man in Rome, crushes the slave revolt of Spartacus in 71, crucifying 6,000 captives along the Via Appia from Capua to Rome. Gaius Julius Caesar, a patrician of modest means but extraordinary ambition, conquers Gaul between 58 and 50 before the Common Era, killing perhaps 1 million and enslaving another 1 million. The first triumvirate, an informal alliance among these three dust, collapses with Crassus's death at Carrhae in 53. Pompey aligns with the Senate against Caesar. On January 10th, 49 before the Common Era, Caesar crosses the Rubicon River with a single legion, igniting civil war. Within 18 months, he defeats Pompey's forces across Spain, Greece, Egypt, and Africa. Named Dictator Perpetuo in February of 44, Caesar concentrates power beyond any precedent. On the Ides of March was the 15th, 23 senators drive their daggers into him at the foot of Pompey's statue in the Theatre of Pompey. His blood pools on the marble floor. The conspirators call it liberation. The Roman people call it murder. The funeral pyre blazes in the Forum, and the Republic, already hollowed by decades of civil violence, enters its final convulsions. The pyre's embers still glow when the killing begins again. Caesar's adopted heir, his grandnephew Gaius Octavius, barely 18 years old, arrives in Rome to claim his inheritance. The boy possesses neither military reputation nor political experience, only a name. It proves sufficient. By November of 43 before the Common Era, Octavian has forged an alliance with Marcus Antonius and Marcus Aemilius Lepidus, the second triumvirate, a legally sanctioned autocracy of 3. Proscription lists appear on the Forum walls. 2,000 equestrians and 300 senators die, their property confiscated to fund the coming war. Cicero's severed hands are nailed to the rostra from which he once spoke. At Philippi in Macedonia, October of 42, the triumvir's legions crush the armies of Brutus and Cassius. The Republic's last defenders fall on their own swords. The Roman world divides. Octavian takes the west, Antonius the east. Lepidus fades into irrelevance. For a decade, the arrangement holds through mutual suspicion and renewed treaties. Antonius entangles himself with Cleopatra VII of Egypt, conducting eastern campaigns from Alexandria, distributing Roman provinces to their children in ceremonies that offend Roman sensibilities. Octavian exploits every misstep, publishing Antonius's will, rallying Italy behind an oath of personal loyalty. On the 2nd of September, 31 before the Common Era, 300 of Octavian's warships meet Antonius's fleet in the narrow waters off Actium, on the western coast of Greece. Marcus Vipsanius Agrippa commands the engagement. The lighter Liburnian galleys outmaneuver Antonius's heavy quinqueremes. Cleopatra's squadron breaks through the line and flees south. Antonius follows. Their abandoned fleet burns. Within a year both are dead in Alexandria, he by his own blade, she by asp or poison. Egypt becomes a Roman province, its grain reserves now feeding Rome directly. Octavian returns to a city exhausted by 20 years of civil war. He proceeds with extraordinary patience. In January of 27 before the Common Era, he theatrically surrenders all extraordinary powers to the Senate. The Senate, carefully curated, returns them enhanced, granting him the name Augustus, the revered one, along with proconsular authority over the frontier provinces where the legions stand. In 23 he accepts tribunician power, rendering his person sacrosanct and granting him veto over all legislation. He holds no single office that Romans would recognize as kingship. He calls himself merely princeps, first citizen. The fiction preserves senatorial dignity, while concentrating real power absolutely. The city transforms physically. Augustus later claims to have found Rome a city of brick and left it a city of marble. Agrippa constructs the first Pantheon, the baths bearing his name, and a new aqueduct. The Forum of Augustus rises northeast of the old Forum, dominated by the temple of Mars, Ultor, Mars the Avenger, vowed at Philippi. Carrara marble from Tuscany sheathes buildings once faced in volcanic tufa. The Arapaxis, the altar of Augustan peace, dedicated in 9 before the Common Era, depicts the imperial family processing in carved relief, serene, fertile, divinely favored. 9 cohorts of Praetorian guards, each 500 strong, garrison Italy as the emperor's personal force. 28 legions hold the frontiers along the Rhine, the Danube, the Euphrates, and the African desert edge. A census counts the empire's inhabitants. Provincial governors answer to Augustus directly in imperial provinces, to the Senate in pacified ones. Roads radiate outward, their milestones measuring distance from the golden milestone in the Forum. The population of Rome approaches 1 million souls, fed by Egyptian and African grain, entertained by games Augustus funds personally. Yet the frontier exacts its price. In September of 9 of the Common Era, Germanic warriors under Arminius annihilate 3 legions, the 17th, 18th, and 19th, in the Teutoburg forest. Publius Quinctilius Varus and 20,000 soldiers perish in rain-soaked woodland ambush. Augustus never replaces those legion numbers. The Rhine becomes a permanent boundary. On August 19th, 14 of the Common Era, Augustus dies at Nola, aged 75, having ruled for 41 years. He leaves an empire at peace, its borders defined, its institutions functioning beneath the careful architecture of one man's authority. The Senate declares him a god. His successor Tiberius inherits not a republic restored, but a monarchy disguised, stable, prosperous, and irreversible. Tiberius governs from the shadows. The second emperor rules for 23 years, increasingly remote, withdrawing to his villa on Capri in 26 of the Common Era and never returning to Rome. The machinery Augustus constructed proves durable enough to function without a visible hand at the wheel. Legions hold the Rhine and Danube. Tax revenues flow. Provincial governors rotate. The Senate meets, debates, and ratifies decisions already made. When Tiberius dies in 37, smothered perhaps by his own Praetorian prefect, the system transfers power to Gaius, called Caligula, whose brief, erratic reign ends with assassination in 41. The Praetorian Guard, those 9,000 soldiers stationed at the edge of Rome, then elevate Claudius, a limping scholar dismissed by his own family, to the purple. Claudius proves unexpectedly capable. In 43 of the Common Era, 4 legions cross the Channel into Britain, the 2nd Augusta, the 9th Hispana, the 14th Gemina, and the 20th Valeria Victrix, approximately 40,000 men supported by auxiliary cavalry and supply ships. The pretext is a request from a deposed tribal king. The reality is imperial ambition and the island's tin, lead, and grain. Claudius himself arrives briefly to accept the surrender of Camulodunum, riding an elephant through the British mud for theatrical effect. Within a generation, Roman roads cut through forests where no wheeled vehicle has travelled before. Legionary fortresses rise at Isca, Diva, and Lindum, their stone walls and bathhouses imposing Mediterranean order on an Atlantic landscape. Under Nero, the last of the Julio-Claudians, catastrophe strikes the capital itself. On the night of July 18th, 64 of the Common Era, fire erupts near the Circus Maximus and burns for 9 days. 10 of Rome's 14 districts suffer damage. 3 are obliterated entirely. Hundreds of thousands lose their homes among the dense wooden apartment blocks, the insulae that house the urban poor. Nero rebuilds on a grand scale, imposing new regulations requiring wider streets and fireproof stone construction. But he also seizes 300 acres of central Rome for his Golden House, a palace complex with a rotating dining room and a 30-meter bronze colossus of himself. The extravagance, combined with rumors that he started the fire, destroys his legitimacy. He deflects blame onto the small Christian community, executing them as arsonists in spectacles of cruelty. Nero's suicide in 68 triggers civil war. 4 emperors claim power in a single year: Galba, Otho, Vitellius, and finally Vespasian, a general commanding legions in Judea where revolt has raged since 66. Vespasian founds the Flavian dynasty and immediately begins erasing Nero's memory. The Lake of the Golden House becomes the foundation for the Flavian amphitheatre, the Colosseum, dedicated by his son Titus in 80, capable of seating 50,000 spectators beneath a retractable canvas awning. That same year, Vesuvius buries Pompeii and Herculaneum under meters of volcanic ash, preserving a complete Roman town in suspended animation, its bakeries, brothels, election graffiti, and garden frescoes frozen on August 24th, 79. The Flavians stabilize the frontier and the treasury, but it is Trajan, a Spaniard who takes power in 98, who pushes Rome to its absolute geographic maximum. His Dacian wars of 101 to 106 conquer modern Romania, seizing King Decebalus's gold reserves, an estimated 165 tons, and settling the province with veterans. His bridge over the Danube, designed by Apollodorus of Damascus, spans over a kilometer on 20 stone piers. In 114, Trajan marches east, annexing Armenia, Mesopotamia, and briefly reaching the Persian Gulf. By 117, the empire encompasses 5 million square kilometers. Trajan gazes at ships departing for India and reportedly laments that he is too old to follow Alexander's path further. He dies returning home in Cilicia in August of 117. The empire will never be larger. The empire will never be larger, but its true achievement is not measured in square kilometers. It is measured in the daily rhythm of 60 million lives bound together by stone roads, lead pipes, shared law, and the ceaseless movement of grain ships across open water. At the height of the 2nd century, the Roman world functions as a single integrated system, stretching from the heather moors of northern Britain to the date palms of the Euphrates. and the texture of that world is written not in imperial edicts, but in the smell of bread baking in Ostia's bakeries, the clatter of iron-rimmed cart wheels on basalt paving stones before dawn, and the steam rising from heated pools in 1,000 provincial bathhouses. Rome itself holds perhaps 1 million inhabitants, the largest city the Western world will know for over a millennium. 11 aqueducts deliver roughly 300 million gallons of water daily, cascading through settling tanks and distribution castella into public fountains, bathhouses, and the homes of the wealthy. The Aqua Claudia arrives from 43 miles distant, carried on arched channels that stride across the Campagna on piers of rusticated tufa. Lead pipes stamped with the names of property owners branch from the main conduits beneath the streets. Water is not a luxury here. It is infrastructure as ideology, the visible proof that Roman order conquers nature itself. The city feeds on imported grain. Each year, roughly 150,000 tons of wheat arrive from Egypt and North Africa aboard broad-hulled freighters, some displacing over 1,000 tons. They dock at Portus, the artificial harbour Trajan completed near the Tiber mouth, where massive cranes powered by human tread wheels swing amphorae from hold to quayside. From Portus, barges carry the grain upriver to warehouses below the Aventine Hill. The state distributes free grain to approximately 200,000 male citizens, the Annona, while the rest enters private markets. Bakers grind it in donkey-powered mills, their millstones of volcanic lava from Orvieto, and sell round loaves scored into 8 wedges from shop counters open to the street. Beyond grain, the empire trades in everything. Spanish garum, fermented fish sauce, travels in narrow-necked amphorae to every frontier post. North African olive oil fills the round-bellied Dressel 20 vessels that accumulate in such quantities at Rome's river docks that their discarded shards form Monte Testaccio, an artificial hill 45 meters high. Gallic wine, Egyptian papyrus, Baltic amber, Indian pepper, Chinese silk, all flow along routes secured by legionary garrisons and naval patrols. 53,000 miles of paved roads connect over 300 cities, each road built to a standard cross-section of layered gravel, sand, and fitted stone. Daily life varies enormously by class. The wealthy inhabit domus houses with painted walls, mosaic floors, and private gardens cooled by fountains. The urban poor crowd into insulae, apartment blocks rising 5 or 6 stories, built of timber-framed concrete, prone to collapse and fire. Average life expectancy hovers between 25 and 35 years, dragged down by infant mortality that claims perhaps 1/3 of children before age 5. Slavery permeates every level of society, with enslaved people comprising an estimated 10 to 15% of the total population, working as household servants, agricultural labourers, mine workers, tutors, and skilled artisans. The calendar grants roughly 150 public holidays annually, filled with chariot races at the Circus Maximus, gladiatorial combat in amphitheatres, theatrical performances, and religious festivals. Public baths serve as social centres where all classes mingle in heated rooms warmed by hypocaust systems, raised floors above furnace-fed channels of hot air. In Cologne, glass blowers produce translucent vessels traded across the northern provinces. In Leptis Magna, olive presses operate on an industrial scale. In Ephesus, the library of Celsus rises in marble splendor. The empire at its height is not a single culture imposed from above, but a mosaic of provincial traditions unified by roads, law, coinage, and the Latin and Greek languages that carry commerce and administration from one horizon to the next. Trajan dies in August of 117 of the Common Era, his eastern conquests already unraveling behind him. His successor Hadrian inherits an empire stretched beyond sustainable limits, Mesopotamia in revolt, Jewish communities across the eastern Mediterranean in open rebellion, legions exhausted from years of continuous campaigning. Within months of his accession, Hadrian abandons Trajan's Parthian provinces, pulling Roman forces back to the Euphrates. The decision is deliberate, strategic, and permanent. The empire will no longer expand. It will consolidate. Hadrian spends more than half his 21-year reign traveling. He visits nearly every province, inspecting frontier defenses, founding cities, dedicating temples. In Britain, beginning in 122, he orders construction of the wall that bears his name, 80 Roman miles of stone and turf stretching from the Solway Firth to the River Tyne, punctuated by mile castles and turrets, garrisoned by auxiliary troops drawn from across the empire. It is not merely a military barrier, but a statement of imperial philosophy. Rome's boundaries are fixed, defined, and defended. At Tivoli, below the Sabine Hills, Hadrian constructs a vast villa complex spanning nearly 300 acres, pools reflecting colonnaded porticos, libraries, theatres, baths, and gardens designed to evoke places he has visited across the empire. The Canopus Canal recalls Egypt. The Stoa Poikile echoes Athens. In Rome itself, he rebuilds the Pantheon, replacing Agrippa's fire-damaged structure with the revolutionary domed rotunda that still stands, its unreinforced concrete dome spanning 43 meters, its oculus open to the sky, a feat of engineering unmatched for over a millennium. Hadrian's adopted successor, Antoninus Pius, reigns from 138 to 161 in remarkable tranquility. 23 years without major war or crisis. But the peace proves fragile. Marcus Aurelius, who succeeds Antoninus, inherits catastrophe. In 165, legions returning from a Parthian campaign carry disease westward. The Antonine plague, likely smallpox, sweeps through the empire for 15 years, killing perhaps 5 million people. Cities lose a quarter of their populations. Military recruitment falters. Tax revenues collapse. Simultaneously, Germanic peoples press the Danube frontier with unprecedented force. The Marcomanni and Quadi cross into Roman territory, penetrating as far as northern Italy, the first hostile incursion into the peninsula in nearly 3 centuries. Marcus Aurelius spends most of his reign on campaign along the Danube, writing his philosophical meditations by lamplight in military camps. The column erected in Rome after his death depicts the grinding warfare in carved relief. Burning villages, chained captives, rivers crossed under arrow fire. He dies in March of 180, likely at Vindobona on the Danube, having spent his final years fighting wars he never sought. His son Commodus abandons the frontier campaigns immediately, returning to Rome to indulge in gladiatorial spectacle and autocratic excess. His assassination on the last day of 192 triggers civil war. The year of 5 emperors in 193 sees rival claimants backed by provincial armies, a pattern that will define the coming century. Septimius Severus, born in Leptis Magna in North Africa, emerges victorious, founding a dynasty that rules until 235. He expands the army, raises legionary pay, and reportedly advises his sons to enrich the soldiers and ignore everyone else. The Severan period transforms imperial governance. Caracalla's Constitutio Antoniniana of 212 extends Roman citizenship to virtually all free inhabitants of the empire, an administrative simplification that also broadens the tax base. The baths of Caracalla rise in Rome, their vaulted halls capable of accommodating 1,600 bathers simultaneously, their concrete walls faced with marble and mosaic. Yet beneath this monumental confidence, the structures of stable succession have eroded. When Severus Alexander falls to mutinous soldiers in 235, no constitutional mechanism exists to prevent the chaos that follows. The empire enters 50 years of near-continuous civil war, its institutions strained beyond recognition by the very military forces that Severan policy had empowered and enriched. The killing begins immediately. Maximinus Thrax, a Thracian soldier of enormous physical stature who has never set foot in Rome, seizes power from the murdered Severus Alexander in 235. He doubles military pay and launches punitive campaigns across the Rhine and Danube, funding his wars through confiscation of temple treasures and municipal funds. Within 3 years, revolt erupts in Africa, then in Italy itself. Maximinus dies at the hands of his own troops outside Aquileia in 238, the year of 6 emperors, during which the Senate's chosen candidates, the elderly Gordians of Africa, perish within weeks, and power passes through a bewildering succession of claimants before settling briefly on the teenage Gordian III. The pattern repeats with accelerating violence. Between 235 and 284, at least 26 men claim the imperial title. Their average reign lasts barely 2 years. Most die by assassination or in battle against rival Roman armies. The silver Antoninianus, the empire's standard coin, undergoes progressive debasement, from 50% silver content under Caracalla to barely 5% by the 260s, its thin silver wash over bronze core cracking to reveal the worthlessness beneath. Prices spiral. Confidence in imperial currency collapses. Provincial economies retreat toward barter. External enemies exploit the chaos with devastating precision. Gothic confederations cross the Danube repeatedly, raiding deep into the Balkans and Anatolia. Emperor Decius falls fighting Goths at the Battle of Abritus in 251 Tules, the first Roman emperor killed in combat against a foreign enemy. The Antonine Plague's successor, the Plague of Cyprian, ravages the empire from roughly 249 to 262, killing perhaps 5,000 daily in Rome alone at its peak. Entire legions dissolve. Tax revenues plummet as populations decline and administrative structures fragment. The nadir arrives in 260. Emperor Valerian marches east against the Sassanid Persian king Shapur I and suffers catastrophic defeat near Edessa. Valerian himself is captured, an unprecedented humiliation carved in triumphant relief on the rock face at Nakshi Rostam, showing the Roman emperor kneeling before the Persian king. His son Gallienus, left to govern alone, faces simultaneous breakaway movements. Postumus, a general on the Rhine, establishes the Gallic Empire encompassing Gaul, Britain, and Hispania, minting his own coins, appointing his own consuls, defending the frontier Rome can no longer protect. In the east, Zenobia of Palmyra extends her authority over Syria, Egypt, and much of Anatolia. ruling in the name of her young son, Vabalithus, while Palmyra's colonnaded streets witness the administration of a rival empire. The empire fractures into three competing zones, yet the center holds barely. Gallienus reforms the cavalry into mobile field armies detached from static frontier garrisons, an innovation that future emperors will exploit. Claudius II defeats the Goths decisively at Naissus in 269 before dying of plague. His successor Aurelian, called Restorer of the World, reunifies the empire through relentless campaigning, crushing the Palmyrene kingdom by 272, reducing the Gallic Empire by 274. Aurelian also constructs massive new walls around Rome itself, 19 kilometers of brick-faced concrete encircling a city that had not needed fortification in 6 centuries. The wall's very existence announces that the old certainties have vanished. Aurelian falls to conspiracy in 275. More short reigns follow until Diocletian, another Illyrian soldier, takes power in 284. His diagnosis is radical. One man cannot govern this empire alone. By 293, he establishes the Tetrarchy, 4 rulers sharing power, 2 senior Augusti and 2 junior Caesars, each governing a quarter of the empire from separate capitals. Diocletian rules from Nicomedia, not Rome. He fixes prices through his edict on maximum prices, reorganizes provinces into smaller units grouped under dioceses, expands the army to perhaps 400,000 men, and binds peasants to their land through hereditary obligation. In 303, seeking ideological unity, he launches the Great Persecution against Christians. By 305, exhausted, he does what no emperor has done voluntarily. He abdicates, retiring to his enormous palace at Split on the Dalmatian coast, its walls enclosing an entire small city. The empire survives, but transformed beyond recognition. The Tetrarchy collapses almost immediately. Diocletian's abdication in 305 creates a vacuum that no constitutional arrangement can contain. Within 2 years, 6 men claim imperial authority simultaneously. The system designed to prevent civil war produces the very chaos it was meant to abolish. From this disorder, one figure emerges with singular clarity: Constantine, son of the Western Caesar Constantius Chlorus, proclaimed Augustus by his father's troops at Eboracum in Britain upon Constantius's death in 306. For 6 years, Constantine consolidates his hold over Gaul and Britain, building loyalty among the legions, minting coins that display his image with increasing confidence. His rival in Italy is Maxentius, son of the retired Augustus Maximian, who controls Rome itself and the grain supply from Africa. In October of 312, Constantine marches south through the Alpine passes with perhaps 40,000 men, winning engagements at Turin and Verona before approaching the capital. Maxentius, rather than enduring a siege behind the Aurelian walls, advances his army across the Tiber on a pontoon bridge near the Milvian Bridge north of the city. The battle on October 28th is decisive and brief. Maxentius's troops, pressed against the river with no room to maneuver, break and flee. The pontoon bridge collapses under the weight of retreating soldiers. Maxentius drowns in the Tiber. Constantine enters Rome as sole master of the West. What happens next transforms the empire more profoundly than any military victory. Constantine attributes his success to the Christian God. Whether his conversion represents genuine spiritual conviction or political calculation remains unknowable, but its consequences are absolute. In February of 313, meeting his eastern co-emperor Licinius at Milan, Constantine issues what later tradition calls the Edict of Milan, a proclamation of universal religious tolerance that restores confiscated Christian property and grants the Church legal standing throughout the empire. Christianity moves from persecuted sect to imperially favored religion in less than a decade. Constantine defeats Licinius in 324, becoming sole emperor over both East and West. He immediately begins reshaping the empire's sacred geography. In Rome, he constructs the first great Christian basilicas, the Lateran Basilica, Old St. Peter's over the Apostles' traditional burial site on the Vatican Hill, and Santa Croce in Gerusalemme. These buildings deliberately adopt the form of the Roman civil basilica rather than the pagan temple, creating a new architectural language for Christian worship. Their colonnaded naves, timber roofs, and apsidal ends establish the template for Western church architecture for a millennium. But Constantine's most radical act is the founding of a new capital. On the site of ancient Byzantium, commanding the Bosphorus Strait between Europe and Asia, he lays out Constantinople, dedicated on May 11th, 330. The city receives its own senate, its own grain dole, its own forum adorned with a porphyry column bearing Constantine's image. Its walls enclose 7 hills in conscious imitation of Rome, yet no pagan temples rise within them. Constantinople is conceived as a Christian city from its foundation, its churches filled with relics gathered from across the eastern provinces. In 325, Constantine convenes the Council of Nicaea, gathering over 300 bishops to resolve the Arian controversy over Christ's divine nature. The resulting Nicene Creed establishes Orthodox Trinitarian theology as imperial policy. The emperor who once sacrificed to Sol Invictus now arbitrates Christian doctrine. A new gold coin, the solidus, replaces the debased currency of the crisis era, 4.5 grams of pure gold, stable enough to remain the Mediterranean's standard currency for 7 centuries. On its face, Constantine gazes heavenward. The eagle of Jupiter yields to the cross of Christ. The empire endures, but its soul has been remade. The permanent division takes effect upon the death of Theodosius in January of 395. His elder son Arcadius receives the East, governing from Constantinople. His younger son Honorius, barely 11 years old, inherits the West, nominally ruling from Milan under the guardianship of the half-Vandal general Stilicho. The arrangement is meant to be administrative, a practical sharing of military burdens across an empire too vast for one court to defend. It becomes instead a fatal separation. The two halves will never again be governed by a single ruler. The crisis arrives with terrifying speed. Alaric, king of the Visigoths, has served as a Roman federate commander in the Balkans, leading Gothic warriors in Roman service while demanding land, titles, and payment that neither court consistently provides. Denied a permanent military command, he turns westward. In 401, his forces cross the Julian Alps into Italy. Stilicho repels them at Pollentia and Verona, but the defense requires stripping the Rhine frontier of its garrisons. On the last night of December 406, Vandals, Alans, and Suevi cross the frozen Rhine into Gaul. No Roman army opposes them. The western provinces begin to fragment. Stilicho's execution in 408, ordered by the suspicious Honorius, removes the one commander capable of coordinating Western defense. Alaric, his negotiations for land and gold repeatedly frustrated, marches on Rome itself. The city that has not seen a foreign enemy within its walls for 800 years falls on the 24th of August, 410. The Visigoths enter through the Salarian Gate. For 3 days they plunder the ancient capital, stripping gold from temples, carrying off treasures accumulated across centuries of conquest. They spare the churches. Alaric is an Arian Christian, but the psychological shock reverberates across the Mediterranean world. Jerome, writing from Bethlehem, declares that the light of the world has been extinguished. Yet Rome's fall is not the empire's end. Honorius governs from Ravenna, protected by marshes and accessible only by causeway, his court increasingly irrelevant to the provinces slipping beyond imperial control. Britain, cut off since 410, receives no further legions. Local authorities issue their own coinage, then abandon Roman urban life entirely. Villas with hypocaust heating and mosaic floors stand empty, their roofs collapsing, their fields reverting to scrub. In Spain, the Vandals and Suevi carve out kingdoms. In Gaul, the Visigoths settle around Toulouse under a treaty of 418, nominally as federates but functionally as an independent power. The Vandals under Gaiseric cross from Spain to North Africa in 429, conquering Carthage by 439. This loss is catastrophic. North Africa supplies the grain that feeds Rome and the tax revenue that pays the Western army. Without African wheat, the city's population, already declining from its imperial peak of over 1 million, contracts further. Without African revenue, the Western court cannot maintain the legions that might recover the lost provinces. The spiral accelerates. Attila's Hunnic confederation erupts into Gaul in 451. The Roman general Aetius, the last effective Western commander, assembles a coalition of Visigoths, Franks, and Burgundians to meet the Huns at the Catalonian plains near modern Chalons. The battle is indecisive, but Attila withdraws, only to invade Italy the following year before retreating beyond the Danube. Aetius's reward for saving the West is assassination by the Emperor Valentinian III in 454. Valentinian himself is murdered months later. The Vandal fleet sacks Rome again in June of 455, this time for 14 days, systematically stripping the temples of their bronze roof tiles, carrying the menorah from Jerusalem's destroyed temple back to Carthage. The last 2 decades produce a succession of puppet emperors, appointed and deposed by Germanic generals who hold the real military power. Ricimer, a half-Suevian, half-Visigothic commander, makes and unmakes emperors at will through the 460s. On the 4th of September, 476, the Germanic chieftain Odoacer deposes the child emperor Romulus Augustulus, whose name ironically echoes both the city's founder and its first emperor. The imperial regalia is dispatched to Constantinople. Odoacer requests no new Western emperor, asking instead to govern Italy as king under Eastern authority. The Western Roman Empire ends not with a dramatic siege, but with a quiet administrative formality. The population of the Western provinces has fallen from perhaps 30 million to under 20 million across the century's violence, displacement, and disruption. Constantinople endures. While the Western provinces fragment into Germanic kingdoms, the eastern capital remains intact behind the triple line of the Theodosian walls. A fortification system completed in 413, that stretches 4 miles across the peninsula, its outer moat, lower wall, and massive inner wall presenting any attacker with an obstacle unprecedented in ancient engineering. The city that Constantine dedicated in 330 now governs an empire still stretching from the Danube to Egypt, from the Adriatic to the Euphrates. Its population approaches 500,000. Its treasury, fed by eastern trade routes and Egyptian grain, remains solvent. Its administration, conducted in Greek, though still calling itself Roman, continues without interruption. The Emperor Justinian ascends the throne in 527, inheriting a state that has weathered the Western collapse and consolidated its Eastern holdings. His ambition is nothing less than the restoration of Roman authority over the lost Mediterranean. His general Belisarius reconquers North Africa from the Vandals in 533, takes Sicily and Italy from the Ostrogoths through brutal campaigns lasting until 554, and briefly reclaims southern Spain. But Justinian's most enduring achievement is not military. Between 529 and 534, teams of legal scholars compiled the Corpus Juris Civilis, the body of civil law, organizing 1,000 years of Roman legal precedent into a coherent system that will eventually become the foundation of European jurisprudence. In 537, the Cathedral of Hagia Sophia is completed after just 5 years of construction. Its dome, 180 feet above the floor, spans 107 feet without internal supports, appearing to float on a ring of 40 windows. Gold mosaic tessera cover 40 acres of interior surface. Justinian reportedly whispers that he has surpassed Solomon, yet Reconquest exhausts the treasury. Plague strikes in 541 Ha. The Justinianic plague kills perhaps a quarter of the empire's population over successive waves. When Justinian dies in 565, his restored western territories are already slipping away. The Lombards invade Italy in 568, reducing Byzantine holdings to Ravenna, Rome, and scattered coastal enclaves. The 7th century brings existential crisis. Arab armies, unified by Islam, sweep out of the Arabian Peninsula after 632. Syria falls in 636. Egypt, the empire's breadbasket, is lost by 642. North Africa follows. By 674, Arab fleets besiege Constantinople itself. The city survives through a secret weapon, Greek fire, a petroleum-based incendiary liquid projected from bronze siphons mounted on warships, igniting on contact with water. A second Arab siege in 717 through 718 fails against the same walls and the same terrible flame. The empire contracts to Anatolia, the Balkans, and fragments of Italy. But it survives. The iconoclast controversy between 726 and 843 tears the state apart over whether religious images constitute idolatry, pitting emperors against monks and Constantinople against Rome. Resolution comes only after a century of theological violence. The Macedonian dynasty, ruling from 867 to 1056, presides over a renaissance, military reconquest of Crete, Cyprus, and parts of Syria, alongside a flowering of art, scholarship, and manuscript preservation that transmits classical Greek knowledge to future generations. Constantinople in the 10th century is the largest and wealthiest city in Christendom. Then catastrophe. In 1204, soldiers of the Fourth Crusade, diverted by Venetian commercial interests, storm Constantinople itself. 3 days of looting strip the city of treasures accumulated over 9 centuries. The empire shatters into successor states. When the Byzantines reclaim their capital in 1261, the state is a shadow. On the 29th of May, 1453, Ottoman Sultan Mehmed II breaches the Theodosian walls with massive bronze cannon. The last emperor, Constantine XI, dies fighting at the gates. 1,500 years of continuous Roman governance, from Augustus through 107 successive emperors in the East, ends in a single afternoon of fire and conquest. The Cathedral of Hagia Sophia, its dome still soaring, becomes a mosque before nightfall. Yet Rome does not die. It transforms. In the monasteries of the Latin West, where candlelight flickers across vellum pages, Benedictine monks preserve what the legions could not defend. Through the 6th, 7th, and 8th centuries, scribes at Monte Cassino, Bobbio, and Vivarium copy Cicero, Virgil, Livy, and the legal commentaries of Gaius onto parchment that will outlast the empires that produced them. Latin ceases to be a spoken vernacular on the streets of Gaul and Iberia, fragmenting instead into the daughter tongues, French, Spanish, Portuguese, Italian, Romanian, languages that today are spoken by more than 800 million people across 4 continents. The grammar is Roman. The vocabulary is Roman. The very sounds carry the ghost of a civilization that administratively vanished, but linguistically never left. The Catholic Church inherits Rome's institutional skeleton. Dioceses map onto provincial boundaries. Bishops govern from the same cities where Roman governors once sat. The Bishop of Rome claims primacy using the title Pontifex Maximus, once held by Augustus himself. On Christmas Day of the year 800, Pope Leo III places a crown on the head of the Frankish King Charlemagne in St. Peter's Basilica, declaring him Emperor of the Romans. The title is a deliberate resurrection. The Holy Roman Empire that follows persists in various forms until 1806, when Napoleon dissolves it, only to model his own imperial imagery on Roman eagles, Roman archers, and Roman law codes. Around 1070, scholars at Bologna rediscover Justinian's Corpus Juris Civilis in its complete form. The effect is revolutionary. Roman legal principles, property rights, contractual obligation, the distinction between public and private law, flood back into European jurisprudence. Every modern civil law system from France to Japan traces its intellectual ancestry to those 6th century compilations ordered by a Byzantine emperor who considered himself fully Roman. Renaissance architects measure the Pantheon's dome with string and compass, marveling at concrete techniques lost for a millennium. Brunelleschi studies Roman vaulting before raising the cupola of Florence's cathedral. Palladio's villas in the Veneto reproduce Roman symmetry and proportion that will travel to Virginia, where Thomas Jefferson builds Monticello in conscious imitation. The United States Senate takes its name directly from the Roman Senatus. The Capitol building rises on columns of Corinthian order. The Republic's founders, Madison, Hamilton, Adams, debate Roman precedents in their letters with the urgency of men who believe the Roman experiment speaks directly to their own. In the 20th century, Mussolini excavates the imperial forums and drives the Via dei Fori Imperiali through ancient ruins, claiming Augustan glory for a fascist state. The appropriation is grotesque but revealing. Rome remains so potent a symbol that modern power still reaches for its imagery. Today, the Forum Romanum receives 4.5 million visitors annually. They walk stones worn smooth by consuls, emperors, and slaves alike. Engineers study Roman concrete, its volcanic ash mixture proving more durable than modern Portland cement in marine environments. Archaeologists continue excavating, still finding new layers beneath layers already ancient when Constantine ruled. The Colosseum stands illuminated against the night sky, its travertine arches incomplete yet unmistakable, a monument not to any single emperor, but to the civilization that conceived it. The roads Rome built still determine the routes of European highways. The calendar Rome reformed still organizes human time. The legal concepts Rome codified still adjudicate disputes in courtrooms on every inhabited continent. What began as a cluster of hut villages above a malarial marsh became the template through which much of the world still understands governance, infrastructure, law, and the possibility of universal order. The marshland is long drained, the empire is long dissolved. But the idea, the Roman idea, endures without apparent limit. Thank you for joining this journey through the full arc of Roman civilization. If this series has deepened your understanding of the ancient world and its echoes in our own, please subscribe to the channel so you never miss a new exploration when it arrives.